Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to this very special alternative student finance update where we are going to take you back many years and explain to you what has happened since David Cameron told us that we were going to get alternative student finance. We're going to bring you up to date after the last webinar that we did, where we had been pushing you guys to be writing into your MPs and to get involved locally to raise awareness of the issue. We did get through to the government. We delivered a letter to the government, and there's been a whole host of activities going on both in Parliament and outside of Parliament. So we'll bring you up to date on exactly what's been happening, and most importantly, what the government has said and what needs to happen going forward as well. So with that, let me first introduce the panelists today. We have, firstly, we have Lord John Sharkey, who is a Lib Dem peer, and he's been a very strong advocate of this campaign from the start. Next, we have Asha Hasan, who is a medic and has been spearheading this campaign and really holding it all together for the last few years now, Asha. So great work on that. And then we have Stephen Timms, who's an MP in East London. And again, Stephen has been really supportive of this, particularly from the Houses of Commons. So welcome to all of you. Let me come to you first, Asha. Tell us what has been going on in this sorry saga that we've all been witness to.
Yeah, so I think we had the webinar last year, right? About a year ago, not quite. And arguably, I think there's been more progress and collective effort from our community in the last year than there's been in the last 8 years combined. I think we can make that case. And because of that collective effort, there's actually been a lot more progress, and the Universities Minister and the Department of Education are listening to us. But if you go back to 2014, when we were also in a similar position, we had the same sort of energy. David Cameron made a commitment a year before saying that never again should a Muslim in Britain feel unable to go to university because they cannot get a student loan. A year later, they put out a consultation, and as a community, we broke the record for the number of submissions, the number of individual submissions to a consultation at that time. That's never been done before. And that's what we did because we were invigorated to sort of express our concern, and we had that energy, we had that belief that it was possible and that it was important. Because of that response, the government had no choice but to follow up on that, and they really got into gear. They hired Islamic finance specialists to come up with a solution, and they really, worked with people to get like a walkthrough as how this could work, how they could introduce a non-interest-based student loan that also does not disadvantage current students as well. And they literally put so much money and energy and time behind that, and that was happening behind the scenes from 2014 to 2016-17. They also did more research after they, scoped it out properly to see what Muslim students felt about this, and they published this, research report as well. I remember doing this, taking part in this research when I was in my first year, and so yeah, this was happening all behind the scenes. In 2017, they finally got through the last hurdle, so they gave themselves legal powers to offer this. They put it into law in 2017. At this point, surely we should have had this by now, right? Surely this should have happened. There was no more hurdles to cross. But I think there's two angles to look at this. It's to look at what's happening behind the scenes and to look at what's happening in our community. It's fair to say in 2017, our community was very much resigned. We weren't aware of what was happening behind the scenes, and it's not our fault. The government really didn't do a good job at letting us know. So once we did the consultation, we sort of just let go. We didn't look into this again. We didn't follow up. And we were being led by the false assumption that, the government don't care. Nothing's going to happen. We just have to make do with what we've got. And because of that false assumption, we did nothing. And because we did nothing, nothing happened. And so that's it. 2017, when we had the opportunity, when we had no more hurdles, nothing happened. And then another thing happened. In 2018, the government did this wide, spread review of the whole of student finance. That wasn't anything we could control. We couldn't really stop it. And they couldn't really change anything in student finance. So it was very much a sort of a pause in terms of trying to get this through as soon as possible. So between 2018 and 2022, which is a few months ago, the review has been going on. A few months ago, me and Stephen Timms met with the Universities Minister before they concluded their review and asked what could we do to make you realise that this is important, to make you follow up with your commitment that you made all those years ago. And what the Universities Minister came back to us was, we're not seeing the evidence. We're not seeing Muslims, the concern about this issue. We're seeing Muslims go to university increasing year on year. We don't think this is a problem as much as it was back in 2014 when we did the consultation. So following on from that, and following on from the efforts that we were doing, alhamdulillah, there was a collective push led by Muslim Census to get this data, to get this evidence. And thankfully, 36,000 of you guys came together in 1 week. I mean, that's even more than what happened back in 2014. You guys all came together, you expressed your concern. There was that energy, there was that belief that this was important for our community. And now we have that leverage. We have that leverage to be able to say to the government, this is why it's important to our government, to our community. This is why you need to follow up with your commitment. And me and Stephen Timms are meeting the Universities Minister tomorrow, actually, and we're going to express that data. We're going to show them that 120,000 students haven't been able to progress in a normal way, either by self-funding and really struggling because of the costs, or not going altogether simply because of the lack of an alternative. And we have that data because you guys showed up that week. So the point is, nothing happened because we did nothing, and we did nothing because we believed there was no point. So we really need to change that, and we really need to believe that, there is a point, and every time we do show up, there is disproportionate results that we can use, and inshallah we are at the tipping point. The government updated the response a few months ago, so they didn't say complete yes, but they also didn't say no, which was something she was very clear to say to us a few months ago. So we haven't pushed them over the line just yet, but we also stopped them from completely letting go of their commitment, which could have happened. So you guys did an amazing job a few months ago, and now is the point where we really come back together and really show the government that we can't let this opportunity slip by our hands, and we really do need this for our community.
Many thanks, Asha. Yeah, it's been a very, very long wait, and completely echo everything that you've said. Stephen, I wanted to come to you next, and it'd be great for you to share with us how you've seen, through your experiences and conversations around the progress that's been made. I know Boris Johnson has made some statements in private to a constituent recently as well. What are the I guess the sparks that give us hope?
Thank you, Ibrahim. Yes, I'll be glad to. I mean, there has been a whole series of parliamentary initiatives over the last year or so. I think it was John Sharkey who started asking questions and tabling amendments in the Lords, first of all. The background, of course, is David Cameron's very clear promise, as you and Asha have reminded us, which did give rise to a good deal of activity. A model was developed, which I think was generally recognised as an acceptable way of providing alternative student finance, but it's just never come to fruition. So I tabled an early day motion arising from discussions that we'd had in the early part of last year. We got 28 signatures on that, which is not bad, but not great. There was then an adjournment debate that I applied for and obtained in July. And as Asha has said, arising from that debate, she and I met the Universities Minister in September of last year, and we asked her about the fact that the Prime Minister had made a very clear promise to deal with this. And she implied in her answer that after David Cameron, the Prime Ministers since then have been less enthusiastic about this, and so we couldn't assume that promise still applied. Now, as you've said, Ibrahim, we've since heard a rather different perspective from Boris Johnson himself. We'll come back to that, but it looks as though in the minds of the Universities Minister, at least, that very clear promise that David Cameron made isn't necessarily regarded as binding. We were told at that point that we needed to wait for the Auger review of student finance. That was due to be announced in October. In fact, it wasn't announced until the beginning of March of this year. It was delayed by virtually 6 months. And when it was published, it said almost nothing at all about this subject. So that was all quite puzzling. The most recent thing that's happened is that arising from discussions, I think, on this in this webinar and work that Asha and others have been doing, lots of people have been talking to their MPs about this. And today I've sent a letter to the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, asking if that committee can have a look at what's being done and why the promise made by David Cameron 8 years ago still hasn't been honoured, and whether ministers can be pressed to honour that promise. That letter, crucially, it's only got half a dozen signatures on it. We didn't go for a big letter, but crucially it does have on it the signature of Sir Graham Brady, the Conservative chair of the 1922 committee, which is the kind of all-powerful group of MPs within the Conservative Party. And the reason he signed it is because Asha and perhaps Ibrahim as well organised for people who live in his constituency to go and talk to him about this issue. And he said he'd be happy to sign, and he contacted me directly following that approach to say he'd be happy to sign the letter. So his signature is on the letter, and I think that means it will carry a good deal of weight with Robert Halfon, the Conservative chair of the Education Select Committee. You mentioned, Ibrahim, what the Prime Minister himself has said about this. He wrote in a letter replying to a constituent that the government does remain committed to introducing alternative student finance. We haven't yet seen much sign of that in the Education Department and recognition that that commitment still applies. But it is my impression that the Prime Minister himself does want this to happen. So the question really now is, where is the blockage? It's no doubt partly in the Treasury, because it will involve some money being spent to set up a different computer system to enable the alternative student finance to be provided. That may be where the crucial block now is, or it may be somewhere else. But I'm hoping with this increasingly vociferous pressure coming from Muslim young people themselves, telling their local MPs that they really want this to be delivered, that we're going to get the change that we are looking for. I think a very important step was the work of the Muslim Census Group, and they've come up with this figure, which I think rings true, that there are probably 4,000 Muslim students a year who are qualified for university, but at the moment are choosing not to go to university because they cannot get finance consistent with their faith. And apart from those 4,000, there are thousands of others who do go and have a struggle. They struggle with their conscience because they're having to take out an interest-paying loan, or they're somehow struggling to fund themselves in some other way. You know, it's a big scale of a problem now, and the government needs to address it. That's the point that we are continuing to make, and I hope we're going to make a breakthrough before too long. Certainly, the more people contact their own MPs and say this needs to be addressed, the better, the more the pressure on the government will be.
Many thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it feels like sometimes we're doing open heart surgery on this, this body that is the government, or Parliament and Whitehall, and we're trying to figure out where the blockage is. And each time we feel like we kind of got there, but we haven't fully nailed it. But I'm hopeful that we've now narrowed it down sufficiently so that we'll get somewhere. John, I wanted to come to you next, and I'd love for you to just explain to us. There's this new consultation,
Sure.
which is the lifelong learning consultation, and it has had our readership up in arms about the user experience and the user interface that they've had to go through to answer this survey. but can you just shed a little bit of light on what it is and why it's important for us to fill it in?
Yes, the government. First of all, I should say that all government surveys are difficult. Their IT skills are not as well developed as you might hope for, and this one is no different. But the survey is important because one of the other commitments that the government has made is to lifelong education, which essentially means, as far as we can tell, that everybody will be entitled to a sum of money, and people are talking about the equivalent of funding for 4 years of tertiary education, which they can use at any time. It doesn't need to be continuous, so it means they can do 2 years in a course, take a year out or a couple of years out, come back and start again. And that's the rough model that the government thinks it has in mind. But part of this, of course, is part of the purpose of the consultation is to find out what difficulties there may be, especially for people with protected characteristics, and religion is one of those, what difficulties there may be for people taking up lifelong learning. Lifelong learning actually absorbs, in many ways, the whole student loan system, because you will be able to use your lifelong learning allowance to do a 3-year degree or do a 2-year course here and a 1-year course there or whatever over the course of your life. So the notion that the lifelong learning should be Sharia compliant is also extremely important. But it's also the case that because of that, we have an opportunity again to make the point that we need urgently Sharia compliant standard student finance. And the reason I make this distinction is I think people should answer the questionnaire, especially question 16, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the distinction is important because governments have a really bad habit of delaying things for no good reason at all. And there is a suspicion that this lifelong learning thing will actually be another thing that's subject to immense delay. And so we need to make it clear in our responses to question 16 that that there is a barrier to lifelong learning and a barrier to undergraduate learning, which is the lack of Sharia compliant student finance in both cases. And I think in our responses, we should, having pointed that out, we should do 2 other things. We should say that there is no reason to wait for the institution of lifelong learning funds in order to get Sharia compliant student loans on the books as soon as possible. The two do not need to, you don't need to wait for Sharia compliant undergraduate loans, undergraduate finance until the government sorted out what it's going to do with lifelong learning. And if we waited that long, I mean, it would be, I think, another major delay. And so if I just look at question 16, if I can now find it on my machine. Question 16 of the consultation says, what barriers might learners with protected characteristics face in accessing and drawing on their lifelong learning account, and how could these be overcome? The answers, as I suggest, should be pointing out that we need Sharia compliant student finance now, and we don't need to wait, and there's no reason why we should wait until the government has actually decided what to do about lifelong learning accounts. And that's the first thing. I think the second thing is to remind the government via the consultation of the consequences and the scale of the problem caused by the lack of Sharia compliant student finance. And Stephen, I think, mentioned some figures a moment ago. And I think the figures we have are extremely compelling. And I would encourage people to look at the figures and to use some of those figures in their responses to question 16. One of the things that the government said about the consultation of 2014, where we had 20,000 responses, they said 2 things about it, apart from agreeing with its conclusions. They said that was the highest number of responses they'd ever had to any consultation of any kind. The second thing they said was they were very impressed because it was quite clear that most of the responses, the overwhelming majority of the responses, were from individuals rather than lobby groups or pressure groups. They were individuals filling in the consultation and telling their own stories. And I think as far as possible, we ought to be guided by that as well, that we should take pains to make sure that when we submit our answers to this consultation, they are personal answers. They're not just repetitions of, please can we have this now? A little story in there would help. Quoting some of the figures we have would help enormously. And I think even wondering out loud about why this has taken so very long would be a good idea in the responses to the questionnaire. I think my overriding concern is that we make them sound personal, we make it sound urgent, we make it clear we don't understand the reasons for the delay, and we need to get on with this. And we can quote some of the figures we have in support of that. And I can't remember what the deadline, Asha, as you probably can remember. What's the deadline for consultation submissions?
6th of May.
6th of May. So we don't have an enormous amount of time, but we do have time. And I think it would be very good to see if we could double, at least double the response rate we got to the questionnaire in 2014 when we had 20,000. I think we should aim for at least 40,000 this time round. And actually, although people are cynical about this, the government does listen to consultations and it's obliged to respond to them. So it's important that we do this.
Many thanks, John. Asha, you've been working on this campaign for a number of years. I mean, I guess we've all been working on it for a while now. What would your request be for people who are listening in terms of other ways that they can get involved? They've gone on the link, they've followed the instructions, they've filled out the form, they've had a good lie down after that form as well, and now they're back up. What can they do next to contribute?
Yeah, sorry, I think I was looking at the camera. Am I looking at the camera now?
Yeah,
you're looking at the
other way
camera.
earlier. So yeah, I think what the most important thing and what I've been doing for the past few months, and Stephen alluded to, is you need to meet your MPs. So what I've been doing, I've been targeting the key MPs, so the Prime Minister, the Treasury, the Education Select Committee, and it's been really, really effective. And we've got the core MPs, people have written to them and people are hopefully going to meet them. But it'd be amazing if we could scale that up to get every MP in England written to. And the only way we can do that is to get a group of core committed volunteers willing to sort of support that, to manage that. And it doesn't matter where you're from, any region in England. If you care about this, if you think this is important, then you're valuable enough. And it's very possible, and it's not that difficult, but we need your support. I think also what we need to do is we need to share our story. We've got a lot of compelling stories. We've got the data to back it up, but we need to be able to share it effectively. So anyone who's good at marketing or copywriting or social media, any of those skills are important. And finally, honestly, if you're just someone who cares, if you're someone who believes that this is important, then honestly, that's more than enough, and things will work out in disproportionate ways. So I'd like to just say I've been working on this for about 6 years, right? Since I started uni, or about 5 years, not quite 6. And literally every time I always get to a point where I'm like, what's the point? Or what can I actually do? I bet I can't do anything. I have no ability, I have no skills, I have no network to actually make any impact. And every time I've sort of pushed past that, things have just worked out in, as I said, disproportionate ways. Like I'm graduating from a 5-year course next year, inshallah, and debt-free, right? And that's not because of my efforts. That's not because of any other reason except that I've been trying to push this particular issue. And through pushing this issue, so many doors have opened up for me. Same thing with Muslim census. They've never had 36,000 responses in a week. That's disproportionate for that platform. So what I'm trying to say is don't worry about what you can do and don't limit what you do based on what you think you're capable of. The results will be beyond your capability because there's blessing in it. And you just have to be willing to try and keep going and trust that it's important. And one more thing as well, this MP campaign and really finding out the right people to target. I didn't really know what I was doing for a certain period of time, and I felt like I was stumbling in the dark a little bit. And then I had a meeting with one of the MPs who's quite responsible for this area and has some level of influence. And he just gave me a sort of roadmap of who to target, who to visit. He didn't have to do that. And I think things will open up for you as you go along. You just have to be committed. You just have to care enough. And we need anyone who can support and help. We really do need you, because we need to keep this going, because as we've seen before, we do nothing happens, right? So yeah, we really need you. Please do click the get involved button on the website, inshallah, and Ibrahim will let you know more.
Awesome. Yeah, you can sign up to be a volunteer. I've shared the link where it's equalaccesstouni.com, and click get involved, and then send in your details, and then we'll be in touch. And you might have heard a few pings. A bit of trivia for you guys. Stephen, actually mainly John, is currently at the coalface of democracy, fighting the various different dodgy bills that are coming through from the Houses of Commons. On what's it called again? What's the bill called, John?
Nationalities and Borders Bill.
That's the one.
And it'll be going back to Stephen later tonight.
Fantastic. I mean, it's not Stephen's fault. I'll hasten to add.
Certainly not.
So yeah, that's the background noise. I guess before we feel free, those of you who are listening in, to share your comments. I'll perhaps put some up on the screen. Halal finance is a good option as it offers total positivity. And then we've had Haludi Foodie, quite like the name, has said, thanks for the valuable update. I've completed the consultation. Getting to question 16 was akin to 16 rounds with Tyson Fury. Nevertheless, I got there at the end. My commiserations to you on that, Haludi Foodie, and well done on that incredible name as well. John, maybe a quick question from me. So we should do this consultation, but then what are the other tricks that we potentially have up our sleeve that we can use to get this over the line?
I think that we will get an opportunity, Stephen and I, in Parliament again, in the new Parliament, which starts again on May the 10th. Sometime after that, there will be a bill that we can amend, which will actually again try to force the issue. And the government, if things work out properly, and I think they will this time, if things work out, the government will not necessarily reject our amendment and our proposal. It will bring in its own proposal to finally do what David Cameron promised so long ago. I mean, the way to get governments to do things, what you need more than anything, is you certainly need a good case. And we have a very good case. You need good data, and we now have very good data. And you need a good moral position as well, and we certainly have that. But what you need on top of all that is perseverance, absolutely perseverance. These campaigns all take longer than is reasonable, longer than they should, but in the end, it's perseverance that gets them over the line. And as some of you know, I've been involved in other campaigns like this. I was involved in the payday lending campaign, which again took some time, and there was a good moral case there, and good data, and a good goodwill too. Perseverance helps you get over the line. I sense very much that we've made a lot of progress over the past couple of years, and we are now, I think, at a kind of tipping point. We will continue to use every opportunity that presents itself to us to keep going. I mean, the questionnaire, getting to question 16 might be difficult. I'm sure it is, but we need to keep going, not just on the questionnaire, but in general. And we will, I think, get opportunities over the next 3 or 4 months to actually make the case, as we have been doing. And we will continue to think of ways of presenting our case compellingly. But I'd like to close by my bit by just saying 3 things really. The first is, it is amazing that the government haven't already done this. Truly amazing. And we still don't know why they're reluctant. we do sense, I think we all sense, that there is an opportunity right now to do something about this. And I think we're getting closer to it. But it does depend on perseverance. And that, to a large extent, will be enormously helped by interaction with MPs. And I think the more MPs that we can get to, the disproportionate effect of that will be felt. The government will take some notice of what its MPs are saying to it about why this should happen, and actually why it hasn't happened already. So perseverance and MPs are the two thoughts that I'd end with.
Fantastic. And I'll add the Ramadan flavor and say that a prayer as well. You should get your kind of you pull your socks up and get in front of the Almighty and see what happens as well. Any final words from anyone else before we conclude?
I'll just say the only reward for good is good, right? So if you do this with the right intention, then there's good coming your way. Whenever you want, it'll happen. So get involved.
100%. 100%. Many thanks to all of you who have tuned in, and many thanks to the panelists today for your attendance and also for your ongoing work on this. And there's a lot of paddling that goes on under the surface and behind the scenes. So we really appreciate that and recognize that. And I think the entire Muslim community should be very thankful to all of you for that as well. In fact, here's Marzouk himself, who's reflecting on this point as well. So many thanks to all of you. Once again, please do make sure that you send in your response to the consultation. If you just click on the link that will guide you through how to do it, and please do sign up to be a volunteer as well. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum.